On October 5, 1944, above the skies near Asselt in the Netherlands, 5 aviators from the Royal Canadian Air Force's No. 401 Squadron patrolled high overhead, their Spitfire Mark 9s shining brightly under the midday sunlight. It was squadron leader Smith who first noticed the anomaly, a flash of silver plunging toward Nijmegen at an unbelievable velocity. Without a propeller or any recognizable shape, it was merely a sliver of alloy hurtling faster than any foe the Canadians had faced before. The Me-262 jet fighter veered sharply, leaving subtle trails of exhaust against the violet heavens. For 3 years, Allied spies had murmured about Nazi advancements in jet engines, but such hearsay paled against the actual sight now roaring by at more than 500 km/h. Smith activated his transmitter, directing Flight Lieutenant Davenport, Flight Lieutenant Everard, Flying Officer Mai, and Flying Officer Sinclair to form up for an assault. The ensuing clash marked the initial verified instance of a jet aircraft downed by gunfire during aerial warfare. Even more crucially, it exposed the first flaw in the supposedly unbeatable miracle weapon touted by German broadcasters. The Messerschmitt Me 262 Schwalbe had just bared its key weakness. Soon after, pilots flying American P-51 Mustangs would exploit that flaw through organized pursuit tactics, turning the pioneering operational jet into something largely ineffective, revolutionary though its tech might be. The shock from that initial jet sighting spread quickly among Allied squadrons throughout Europe. Those who saw the Me-262s grasped right away that the rules of dogfighting had shifted irrevocably. Captain Chuck Jagger from the 357th Fighter Group, based at RAF Leiston, absorbed the debriefings with mounting alarm. The Nazi jet could hit 540 mph straight and level flight, outpacing the P-51 Mustang's maximum of 430 mph. In a direct pursuit, the Me-262 proved utterly unattainable. The numbers were harsh and indisputable. Should the Luftwaffe field enough of these machines, backed by sufficient fuel and skilled crews, the Allied raids hammering German factories might suffer devastating setbacks. B-17. Flying fortresses plodding through skies riddled with flak at just 180 mph would become sitting ducks for attackers who could strike from unexpected directions and vanish before protective escorts intervened. For the first occasion since securing dominance in European airspace, Allied leaders confronted the risk of forfeiting it. Yet the Me-262's innovative build harbored flaws stemming from the raw state of jet power in 1944. The Junkers Jumo 004 axial flow turbojet motors signified a massive advance in flight engineering. Still, they remained basic and finicky. Each produced roughly 1,980 pounds of thrust at 87 RPM, guzzling J2 synthetic fuel from lignite at double the consumption of traditional prop planes. Turbine blades, forged from chromadur alloy due to shortages of durable nickel and chromium, endured scorching heat that led to swift material fatigue. In battle scenarios, the Jumo 004B units demanded maintenance after about 10 hours of use, with full swaps often required after 25 hours total. Thus, following just 3 or 4 missions, Me-262s called for fresh power plants, spawning supply chain headaches that Nazi mechanics struggled to overcome. The engine's throttle behavior created urgent combat issues. Piston motors reacted nearly immediately to lever changes, but the Jumo 004 lagged noticeably. Pushing the throttle too aggressively flooded the burners with too much fuel before airflow ramped up, spiking exhaust temps and stressing the blades. Airmen needed to handle their controls with careful finesse, easing inputs and allowing time for equilibrium. During fights where instants could decide life or death, this delay turned the quickest warplane into an exposed mark at pivotal times. The Me-262's departure and arrival routines amplified these power plant issues into outright operational disasters. Boasting a wing loading of 294 kg per square meter, far above rivals, the jet demanded liftoff velocities over 110 km in descent paths at comparable rates. In the vital buildup after brake release, the Me-262 took almost 30 seconds to attain airborne pace, lumbering along the strip as its motors fought to build power at sluggish airspeeds. For that half-minute, the plane sat defenseless, tracing a fixed path at steady velocity without evasion options. Any opposing fighter spotting an Me-262 on takeoff enjoyed a virtually static quarry, unable to dodge, accelerate away swiftly, or mount much defense. Approach phases for landing echoed these perils. As Me-262 crews glided toward their fields, after completing 60 to 90-minute sorties with fuel indicators nearing zero, pilots were forced to reduce velocity for touchdown, resetting flaps and landing gear, which once more turned them into easy marks as they cruised steadily and horizontally. The groundbreaking turbojets that rendered the Me-262 unbeatable up high now weighed it down like dead weight in these sluggish intervals. At 8th Air Force Command in England, intel specialists dissected the issue systematically across the waning summer and budding autumn of 1944. Aerial surveys pinpointed Me-262 fields at Amma, Heppe, Rheine, Lechfeld, and Munich Re. Scrutiny of combat film from scarce jet clashes highlighted the plane's swiftness perks, yet exposed its sluggish drawbacks too. Allied spies understood that Me-262 aviators, after guzzling most of their fuel in rapid pursuits, needed to head back to these exact strips. Diversions to backup sites weren't feasible since the jet power plants demanded exclusive J2 fuel, stocked solely at approved depots. This locational limit opened a window. If P-51 Mustangs could hang around close to confirmed jet sites, they might pounce on Me-262s amid their riskiest stretches. Such a strategy demanded restraint, long-range tanks, and aviators ready to plunge into Germany's fiercest anti-aircraft zones, yet it provided the sole dependable way for prop planes to challenge jets on near-even footing. The Luftwaffe spotted this soft spot right after initial jet casualties. Leaders set up dense flak barrages along inbound paths to Me-262 airfields, stationing 88mm artillery, 37mm autocannons, and clusters of 420mm guns to weave walls of shrapnel that intruders had to breach. They detailed their top prop fighters, the FW-190D Dora and the scarce Ta-152H, to offer overhead protection for jet departures and arrivals. Where feasible, launch timetables got shuffled to foil predictions by Allied pilots. Certain fields placed fake planes to draw foes into flak ambushes. Autobahns by various jet hubs were adapted as backup runways, with hidden revetments in nearby forests, letting Me-262s function from spots Allied recon hadn't mapped. Even with these safeguards, the core operational flaw stayed irreducible. Me-262s required liftoffs and settlings, and in those windows, they lay bare no matter the volume of defending ordnance. Lieutenant Urban Drew from the 361st Fighter Group got deeply acquainted with the Me-262 menace on runs over Germany in early October 1944. The 21-year-old from Detroit had tangled with a jet on an earlier outing and submitted thorough intel briefs outlining its prowess. On October 7th, Drew found himself sidelined and up for reprimand after an unapproved victory roll post a winning raid. That penalty evaporated when reports surfaced of a Me-262 buildup at Akmer Airfield in northwest Germany. His prior jet brush positioned him ideally to spearhead a sweep versus the site. He instructed his squadron meticulously, stressing that triumph hinged on stealth, boldness, and embracing the dangers of slicing through German flak screens. His wingmate, Second Lieutenant Robert McCandless, pledged to stick by him come what may. Drew's P-51 Mustang, marked E-2D and dubbed Detroit Miss, departed RAF Little Walden, loaded with full belly tanks plus drop tanks, affording almost 4 hours aloft. That October afternoon, skies over Germany featured scattered clouds and clear sight lines, ideal for picking out planes against the terrain. Drew guided his element at 15,000 feet toward Akmer, eyes sweeping for jet vapor trails or the gleam of sunlight off gleaming metal. Nearing the suspected jet outpost, he caught sight of them. A pair of Me-262s lined up on the tarmac, power plant spooling, set for departure. Drew jammed the stick forward and nose down, gaining velocity while shedding height fast. The Me-262s commenced their rollout precisely as Drew's Mustang hurtled beyond 400 Mellonep in descent. The foremost jet, under Oberfeldwebel Heinz Arnold, had hit maybe 80 mo when Drew unleashed from 800 yards, his 50 caliber guns zeroing in on the speeding quarry. Tracers marched along the strip and struck the Me-262's starboard engine. Arnold's craft bucked as the nacelle shredded, yet his momentum prevented a scrub. The damaged Me-262 wobbled skyward on a single power plant, powerless to climb or surge ahead. Drew tightened to 400 yards and shot anew, this round slamming the canopy zone. Arnold's machine flipped belly up and dove into roadside timber, detonating on collision. The trailing Me-262, handled by Lieutenant Gerhard Kobert, had seen Arnold's demise and tried to break his run, but the jet's sluggish throttle reaction, the jet's high approach velocity and rapid landing made it impossible to stop quickly. When Drew broke off his initial assault, Kobert's plane was still racing along the runway at full tilt, prompting Drew to quickly maneuver for another strike. McCandless issued alerts regarding incoming flak as the German anti-aircraft crews zeroed in. Explosions from 88mm rounds created dark bursts amid the charging Mustangs. Dismissing the flak, Drew plunged downward once more, unleashing an extended salvo at Kobert's Me-262 while it tried to veer away from the strip. Sparks flew across the body and on both power plants from the impacts. The aircraft decelerated sharply before bursting into fire as its fuel reserves caught ablaze. Although Kobert escaped the inferno, his jet was completely destroyed. In under 2 minutes, Drew had taken out a pair of Germany's cutting-edge warplanes, employing methods that soon shaped standard procedures for Allied aviators. This clash proved beyond doubt that even superior technology offered no edge in key operational moments, and that bold action paired with exact timing could counter the Me-262 danger. During the skirmish, Drew's gun camera malfunctioned, leaving no visual proof of his successes. His sole observer, Mandlis, took flak damage while they withdrew from Akma and crashed, ending up as a POW without backing Drew's account. Lacking footage or corroboration, 8th Air Force Command at first rejected Drew's kill confirmations, a devastating setback following one of the conflict's standout tactical feats. Official validation didn't come until 1983, almost 4 decades on, after matching German Luftwaffe documents with U.S. files. Luftwaffe veteran Georg Peter Ed, slated to command the Me-262 unit that day, but grounded by engine trouble, verified seeing a yellow-nosed P-51 swoop onto the Me-262s and eliminate both. From his vantage on the ground, Ed couldn't make out the Detroit Miss inscription on the Mustang's prow, yet his account sufficed. On May 12, 1983, the United States Air Force bestowed the Air Force Cross upon Drew, with Secretary of the Air Force Vern Orr handling the presentation. Drew and his spouse traveled from Johannesburg, South Africa, aboard a C-141 Starlifter for the event. He stands as the sole Allied flyer to down 2 jets in one sortie, piloting a prop-powered fighter. That identical October 7, 1944, Lieutenant Colonel Hubert Zemper from the 479th Fighter Group possibly notched a further Me-262 kill, albeit with lingering doubt. ZMP, among the 8th Air Force's seasoned combat commanders, targeted what he took for a Bf-109 on a sweep over German skies. His camera film proved unclear, capturing a plane that might have been a Messerschmitt Bf-109 or an Me-262. After the war reviews indicated it was probably the latter, but the credit stayed unverified. Beyond individual tallies, the crucial insight was the developing trend. U.S. pilots were learning that Me-262s, for all their groundbreaking velocity, fell to clever strategies. The essence lay in avoiding dogfights in the jet's domain, high-altitude, high-velocity clashes, and compelling confrontations in weak spots where their speed edge vanished. Chuck Jagger met his initial Me-262 precisely a month afterward, on November 6, 1944, while heading an escort detail for bombers close to Akma, Germany. Jagger's P-51, dubbed Glamorous Glenn III in honor of his wife Glennis, was maintaining cruising height when he noticed Me-262s moving to disrupt the bomber group. The jets executed their usual approach, streaking through the formation at blistering pace, loosing short bursts, then leveraging their momentum to pull up steeply to safety before the escorts could respond. Jagger observed the jets vanish into the overcast, seeming to get away unscathed. Conventional wisdom held that pursuing Me-262s was pointless, yet Jagger took a deliberate risk. Those aircraft needed to touch down eventually, and fuel constraints meant it had to be imminent. He peeled away from the bombers and dropped below the clouds, surfacing at a lower level by Akma Field. There, Jagger caught sight of a solitary Me-262 circling for landing, undercarriage down, and flaps deployed, velocity down to around 150 mph as it aligned for touchdown. The German aviator, intent on the runway, evidently missed the Mustang bearing down from overhead and astern. Jagger slammed his throttle to the stops and adjusted for peak dive velocity. The P-51 gained speed swiftly in the plunge. Harnessing gravity to exceed 450 mph, Jagger narrowed the gap to 400 yards and commenced shooting, guiding his tracer rounds onto the Me-262's wing and body. Impacts glittered across the jet's port wing root and frame. Likely struck fatally by the opening volley, the Me-262's pilot offered no dodge. Jagger kept up the barrage while drawing nearer to mere feet, hammering the engines and canopy with fire. The Me-262's port wing buckled skyward. The aircraft flipped upside down and nosedived into the forest a few hundred feet before reaching the runway's start, bursting into a massive orange fireball. There was no moment for Jagger to savor the victory. ACMA's anti-aircraft batteries unleashed a barrage right away, with 88mm rounds detonating near his Mustang as he roared over the base at full throttle and barely above the treetops. His sole choice was to barrel straight along the landing strip, relying on velocity to break free before the gunners could zero in. Tracer rounds streaked across the area from either flank. In the frenzy, shots from one side of the runway even struck the gun emplacements on the other. Jagger kept his P-51 hugging the ground and pushing hard, shot past the airstrip's distant edge, and yanked up sharply, plunging toward the cover of a close-by ravine. He'd made it through one of the riskiest scenarios in aerial warfare, raiding a foe's airfield in broad daylight from low level, but he'd also shown that Me-262s were vulnerable to pursuit and destruction. Jagger recounted the clash later in his typical low-key way. "First time I saw a jet, I shot it down. Not very sportsmanlike, but what the hell?" Throughout the end of 1944 and on into 1945, U.S. fighter aces honed their strategies against jets, drawing from tough real-world lessons and detailed reviews of gun camera films. The P-51 Mustang stood out as perfect for the job thanks to its outstanding reach and staying power. Loaded with full tanks inside plus a pair of underwing drop tanks, a Mustang could stay in the air over 7 hours, letting pilots hang around jet airfields for long stretches. Spotting jets, Mustang flyers leveraged their higher position to swoop down, swapping elevation for velocity. During the descent, a P-51 might hit or surpass 500 mph for a short burst, fast enough to intercept Me-262s in their riskiest phases. Precision and timing proved essential. To hit jets on takeoff, pilots had to detect them soon and maneuver into position prior to liftoff speed. For landings, it meant holding back until the ideal instant when the jet locked into its descent with landing gear out and flaps down. Aces built a deep understanding of Me-262 routines via steady watching and intel breakdowns. They discovered that jets usually flew in the morning or late afternoon, when sightlines were clear but the sun's position hindered enemy spotters. Observations showed Me-262s tended to operate in twos or tight groups, seldom solo, so downing one often opened doors to hit more. They realized German aviators, limited by scarce fuel, couldn't easily abort a landing and circle back. With tanks running lows and Me-262 lined up to touch down, the flyer had to press on no matter the danger. This mental edge handed Mustang attackers a key upper hand. The jet driver was aware of the vulnerability but stuck to the path. The Mustang operator could dive in boldly, sure the prey wouldn't blast away and vanish. As these methods took hold, the Luftwaffe's defenses evolved into more complex setups, though core issues persisted unsolved. Anti-aircraft zones thickened, with certain landing paths guarded by over 100 weapons in mixed sizes. Escort fighters ramped up as FW-190D and TA-152H squadrons got orders to tangle with Allied planes around jet sites, no matter the bigger picture. Me-262 crews were told to mix up their descent routes, throwing in sudden jinks and height shifts to throw off pursuers. Certain fields rolled out fog machines to shroud the strip amid arrivals. Even so, the harsh math stayed fixed. Me-262s depended on set bases with dedicated fuel stocks and could only fly for brief times. Allied interceptors could flood the zones near those sites, turning clashes all but certain. On February 25, 1945, one crushing display of these approaches unfolded when P-51s from the 55th Fighter Group ambushed a full squadron of Me-262s at Geil Start Field, right as they started takeoff runs. The timing was flawless, with the Mustangs showing up precisely when several jets initiated their ground rolls. Amid the ensuing mayhem, U.S. pilots wiped out 6 Me-262s either on the tarmac or mid-liftoff, while damaging others. Those casualties hit hard for that group's active jet fleet. Records from Germany point to the Me-262s as part of the doomed KG-54, a bomber outfit switched to jets, but with crews short on proper escort training. The 55th strike highlighted how focused patrols on jet fields during predictable ops could yield huge gains, albeit with high stakes. A few Mustangs took hits from ground fire in the fight, and the win hinged on total shock value. The psychological impact. The psychological toll of these setbacks on the pilots of the Me-262 was deep and escalating. These aviators were top-tier experts, hand-picked and rigorously prepared, frequently battle-hardened individuals with substantial frontline exposure. They recognized the superior features of their planes and started engagements with well-founded assurance in what their jets could achieve. Yet, ongoing casualties amid takeoffs and landings fostered a pervasive sense of fear around those vulnerable intervals. Every launch and touchdown posed a grave threat of enemy interception, as the flyers were acutely aware. The awareness that opposing fighters could lurk in ambush, the absence of any bailout once committed to approach, and the sight of depleted fuel indicators all generated mental strain that impaired their execution and choices. The assault on Berlin, dated March 18, 1945, highlighted both the Me-262's promise and its failure to alter the conflict's course. In that event, 121 Allied bombers, protected by 632 fighters, targeted the German capital in the final major aerial clash over the nation. Luftwaffe leaders gathered 37 Me-262s from JG-7 for a unified strike against the bomber streams, marking the biggest deployment of jets in one operation to date. Oberleutnant Guy Wegmann guided his group in a relaxed setup toward the approaching bombers, where he and his companions unleashed R-4M unguided rockets for their debut in battle. These 50mm projectiles, mounted in underwing pods holding 12 each, aimed to explode close to bombers, obliterating them through shockwaves and shrapnel without needing exact targeting. Wegmann's salvo tore through a cluster of B-17s, with reports noting several bombers struck and plummeting. Additional Me-262 flyers pursued with standard 30mm guns, leveraging their velocity to execute repeated sweeps before escorts could mount a strong defense. The fight proved short yet fierce. German airmen reported downing 12 bombers and 1 fighter, although U.S. archives confirm only 8 heavy bombers lost, alongside 3 Me-262s lost in the dogfight. This gap between asserted victories and verified tolls reflected the typical chaos-fueled exaggeration in wartime tallies. Even granting the German figures fully, the jets eliminated under 1% of the assault group, as the huge bomber armada hit its mark and unleashed its payload. The relentless bombing effort proceeded without interruption. 5 U.S. fighter pilots did not come back, and scores of bomber personnel perished or were captured. Still, Allied strategists viewed the sortie as a triumph, an unqualified one. Adolf Galland, once Germany's fighter general until his ousting over clashes with Hermann Göring regarding tactics, established JG-44 in February 1945 as a premier Me-262 outfit, led by and staffed with the Luftwaffe's premier aces. Its lineup featured a roll call of aerial icons, airmen boasting hundreds of collective kills. The group received top priority for planes, supplies, and logistics, embodying Berlin's final push to deploy jets effectively under ideal setups. Galland personally joined sorties, racking up successes via guns and R-4M rockets alike. Fellow members notched wins versus bombers, and, under ideal circumstances, even against protective fighters suited to jet maneuvers. However, JG-44's active span lasted mere weeks rather than extended periods. Allied strikes on airfields demanded frequent shifts in location. Scarce fuel left planes idle for days on end. Engine issues ensured that roughly half the allocated jets remained out of service, pending components or overhauls. The hard data on Me-262 missions exposed the chasm between potential and reality. Wartime German logs show about 1,443 Me-262s built overall. From production, just 200 to 300 participated in actual fights. The rest fell to ground attacks, training mishaps, or repair woes. Never did the Luftwaffe muster over 50 Me-262s fully operational at once, with routine readiness nearer 25 per day. Such numbers confronted Allied air power surpassing 5,000 fighters any time, bolstered by countless bombers. The odds proved overwhelming. Me-262 crews asserted around 542 Allied planes downed in aerial duels, but checks reveal the standard inflation across combatants. After the war, U.S. studies estimated true Me-262 inflicted damage far below that. Opposing units outpaced German output and pilot output in destroying Me-262s. American tallies attribute 92.5 confirmed Me-262 kills to P-51 Mustangs, encompassing ground strikes and takeoff landing losses beyond pure air battles alone. The 357th Fighter Group, belonging to Chuck Yeager, topped the U.S. efforts, and Allied units recorded 18.5 verified victories against jet aircraft. The 55th Fighter Group tallied 17 such successes, as did the 78th and 339th Groups, each achieving 15. Royal Air Force squadrons, operating Hawker Tempests and Spitfires among others, added roughly a dozen more jet downings. Overall, these losses outpaced the influx of new Me-262s, causing the active fleet to dwindle even as manufacturing persisted right up to the Nazi capitulation. In after-the-war discussions, top German aviators who piloted the Me-262 delivered varied evaluations of its battlefield utility. Georg Peter Edda, responsible for 12 jet shootdowns including 9 P-51s, noted that the plane's velocity allowed secure intercepts of bombers at elevation, though enemy responses gradually diminished that edge. Walter Dahl, with 11 jet triumphs among them, 6 Mustangs, pointed out how shortages of fuel and engine dependability curtailed maneuvers, rendering the jet's potential edge mostly moot in real scenarios. Heinrich Bahr, boasting 16 Me-262 kills amid 240 total wartime feats, declared outright that the jet debuted far too belatedly and sparsely to influence outcomes. Franz Schall, likely the leading scorer on the type with 17 victories encompassing 6 four-engine bombers and 10 P-51s, perished in combat during April 1945. His prior accounts highlighted the jet's struggles in dogfighting agile foes, stemming from its rapid entry speeds and broad turn radius. Insights from Me-262 missions shaped global jet fighter evolution in the post-war era. Captured examples underwent thorough examination by Western specialists at sites across the U.S. and U.K. These analyses validated the airframe's fundamental integrity while underscoring propulsion tech as the main bottleneck. Subsequent U.S. models such as the Lockheed P-80 and Republic F-84, along with Soviet counterparts like the MiG-15, resolved flaws pinpointed in the Me-262. Enhanced engine durability, superior throttle control, greater fuel economy, and robust structures countered the weaknesses that U.S. interceptors had targeted. U.S. airmen who downed Me-262s earned status as authorities in fighter circles, their after-action debriefs scrutinized by analysts and flight educators. Apart from Urban Drew and Chuck Yeager, numerous others notched jet victories by doggedly employing strategies honed from tough lessons. These aces shared traits like keen vision, accurate marksmanship, bold dispositions, and readiness to embrace dangers shunned by more prudent flyers. Penetrating jet airfields amid heavy anti-aircraft fire demanded bravery verging on foolhardiness. Still, these warriors undertook such runs time and again, grasping the vital need to suppress the jet peril. The toll in lives from these clashes struck deep on both fronts. U.S. pilots slain while striking jet installations met their ends distant from their homeland, frequently in explosive wrecks following flak hits. Some remains stayed unrecovered from wreckage scattered across German soil. For the Luftwaffe's elite Me-262 crews, Each casualty depleted a vital resource that the Reich's dwindling pilot schools couldn't replenish. Every fallen or seized German jet flyer embodied countless training hours, vast expenditures in Reichsmarks, and hard-won expertise from prolonged warfare. Mounting pressure fueled miscalculations, mishaps on runways, and waning proficiency, even for seasoned operators. The logistics backbone for Me-262 activities eroded step by step into spring 1945. With ground forces pushing into the Reich and air campaigns escalating, dedicated jet fuel grew rarer as oil plants suffered strikes or seizure. Engines, already hampered by assembly delays, vanished when plants were razed or overrun. Components for fuselages and gear vanished from distribution networks. Skilled ground crews fell to raids or got pulled into ground combat as manpower needs surged. Fields faced assaults from advancing troops as battlefronts shifted. Come April 1945, Me-262 squadrons resorted to highway segments or hasty clearings, concealing planes amid forests and scraping by with scant resources amid non-stop aerial peril. The closing days of Me-262 flights in late April and early May 1945 featured isolated patrols by fragmented outfits, acting solo, as oversight from higher echelons crumbled. Lone pilots took to the skies when fuel permitted, typically hitting impromptu objectives instead of planned strikes. Certain aviators opted to deliver their jets to enemy zones for capitulation, forgoing futile resistance. Others launched last outings aware that getting back might prove unfeasible. Many Me-262s were lost because of fuel scarcity or the seizure of bases. Some, such as those in Jagdverband 44, kept fighting right up to the war's closing moments, securing victories even as the German armed forces fell apart entirely. After the conflict, evaluations by US and UK aeronautical specialists agreed that the Me-262 marked a groundbreaking engineering feat, though it came too late to alter the war's result. Suppose Hitler hadn't postponed manufacturing by insisting on bomber versions. Suppose the engines had proven more dependable. Suppose larger numbers had been built. The core strategic realities still would have curtailed the jet's influence. By 1944, Germany suffered from insufficient fuel, a shortage of skilled aviators, the absence of control over the skies for secure missions, and a massive imbalance in numbers against the Allied aerial fleets. No matter its superior specs, the Me-262 couldn't overcome these core issues. The encounters between Me-262s and Mustangs left a lasting imprint on aerial warfare principles for decades to come. The key idea that advanced technology alone doesn't ensure battlefield wins turned into a standard lesson in military academies around the globe. Emphasizing the exploitation of foes' weak points over clashing with their strong suits became a staple in training for combat pilots. Acknowledging that even cutting-edge armaments possess exploitable flaws shaped defense strategies and acquisition policies clear through the Cold War era and into later times. The particular methods U.S. flyers devised to offset the Me-262's velocity edge, gaining momentum from height in plunges, striking during exposed segments of flight, and steadily monitoring suspected adversary zones, stayed pertinent as successive waves of superior performance aircraft appeared. Personal stories from pilots of that era offered vivid insights into the mental and operational hurdles of such clashes. In his memoir and various talks, Chuck Yeager stressed that taking down an Me-262 meant embracing huge dangers and relying on rapid judgments amid incomplete data. He recounted the strain of hanging around close to Luftwaffe fields, aware that anti-aircraft fire and defending interceptors would respond instantly to any assault, the precise gauging needed to optimize his descent for peak velocity at the decisive instant, and the thrill of showing that U.S. pursuits could topple the apparently unbeatable turbojets. Urban Drew, honored belatedly in 1983, discussed the irritation of his triumphs being dismissed for almost 4 decades owing to missing proof. Yet he also highlighted the mission's value irrespective of individual acclaim. Insights from me. 262 missions fed straight into the creation of the P-80 Shooting Star, the U.S.'s initial combat-ready jet, which rolled out right as the war wrapped up. At Lockheed, technicians pored over seized Me-262 examples, dissecting power plants, fuselages, and components to grasp what worked and what didn't. The P-80 featured more durable engines with sharper power control, fixing the Me-262's biggest flaw. Enhanced fuel use pushed its reach past the Me-262's 650-kilometer limit. Beefier undercarriage cut down on mishaps that dogged Nazi jet flights. Superior canopy views boosted crew alertness in risky ascent and descent stages. Russian engineers likewise probed Me-262 tech via interned planes and motors sent to labs for thorough trials. The knowledge gained shaped aircraft like the MiG-15 and Yak-15, although they also drew on UK power plant designs, snagged via spying and tech sharing. The worldwide spread of jet combat expertise stemming from Me-262 dissections hastened the shift from propellers to turbines that defined the late 1940s and 1950s. Just a decade after the war concluded, prop planes were outdated for active duty, supplanted by jets across nearly all global air services. A full tally of Me-262 efforts shows a plane that notched operational wins but fell short strategically. Certain aviators racked up notable scores, and targeted sorties showcased the jet's potential under ideal circumstances. Still, its overall effect on Allied sky missions was slight. Bombing raids pressed on without interruption. U.S. and Allied interceptors held the upper hand in the air, while troops pushed into the Reich with solid overhead backing all the way. The effort poured into Me-262 research and assembly, using rare metals, factory output, and expert workers, could instead have yielded greater numbers of traditional pursuits, deployable more efficiently given the fuel and training constraints. The tale of Luftwaffe aviators proudly displaying their jets until P-51 experts ambushed them in defenseless phases boils down ultimately to a narrative of the boundaries of tech-driven answers to strategic challenges were starkly revealed. Though Germany pioneered the globe's inaugural combat-ready jet plane, marking a true innovation that ought to have delivered substantial battlefield edges, it failed to surmount core weaknesses in manpower, supplies, fuel supplies, skilled crews, and overall positioning. Pilots from America and its partners, operating inferior planes yet bolstered by vast manufacturing output, robust preparation programs, dependable supply chains, and effective combat strategies, triumphed over this engineering wonder via endurance, ingenuity, and masterful skill. Ultimately, the Me-262 emerges as one of the most intriguing what-ifs in flight history, a machine that hinted at tomorrow but emerged too tardily to alter yesterday. Its battlefield achievements, though notable in isolated clashes, proved inadequate to sway the conflict's end. The U.S. aviators who devised and implemented countermeasures against the jet menace secured their legacy in aerial annals not via superior hardware, but through strategic prowess, bravery, and an unyielding drive to deny supremacy to what seemed an unbeatable foe. Their victories affirmed the idea that elements of humanity, like education, guidelines, command, and resolve, can surmount hardware shortfalls if wielded effectively. The change from German assurance to Allied control in jet versus Mustang clashes unfolded in under a year, from October 1944, when the initial Me-262 fell, to May 1945, when jet missions halted for good. This swift reversal stemmed not from one isolated cause, but from the ongoing assault on Me-262 flaws, paired with unceasing strain that barred the Luftwaffe from establishing viable jet campaigns. Each jet lost during ascent or descent meant fewer for intercepting bombers. Every aviator lost or taken meant expertise that couldn't be replaced. Each effective strike on jet facilities compelled German efforts to scatter and lose synchronization. In the closing phase of Me-262 flights, German flyers battled with growing urgency as their combat footing worsened. Scarcities of fuel confined missions to vital targets only. Mechanical issues kept planes idle for prolonged stretches. Allied air sweeps turned every departure and arrival into a deadly gamble. Shifts in base locations hampered routines and spirits. Still, certain pilots pressed on with sorties right up to the war's dying moments, showing extraordinary valor and dedication amid hopeless conditions. These individuals recognized defeat was inevitable, yet took to the skies regardless, driven by blends of obligation, integrity, and a faint belief that their efforts could count for something. The narrative wrapped up not in a grand climactic fight, but through slow unraveling as Germany's war machine crumbled utterly in early May 1945. Me-262s lay forsaken on runways, hidden in forests to evade seizure, or wrecked by their own handlers to keep them from enemy hands. A handful were piloted to Allied zones and yielded. The majority just ceased operations as fuel dwindled and upkeep grew unfeasible. The jets, once poised to clear German airspace of Allied raiders, met their end strewn throughout the country. Quiet symbols of the divide between inventive promise and practical execution. The Mustang flyers who pursued them made their way back as peace dawned, their task fulfilled, the jet peril subdued by methods that outshone mere invention.